There is a week buried inside history that doesn't behave like the rest. Most weeks come and go. They leave faint marks, a memory, a scar, a changed address. This one week, spanning 7 days across a hillside city in Roman-occupied Judea, did something no other sequence of days has ever done. It split time in two. The entire world's calendar still measures itself from what happened here. Before, after. That is what this week did. The people who were there did not understand it. Not the crowds who gathered, not the soldiers who carried out the orders, not even the closest friends of the man at the center of it all. They thought they were watching a man fall, a movement collapse, a hope die. They were watching the opposite. What follows is the full account. Every betrayal, every trial, every moment of darkness. What begins in triumph passes through agony and arrives somewhere no one expected. More than 2 billion people on Earth today trace everything back to one single week. To understand what happened in those 7 days, you have to understand what the 3 years before them looked like. Jesus of Nazareth had spent 3 years doing things that had no category. He opened the eyes of men born blind. He spoke to storms and they stopped. He touched people the rest of society refused to touch and made them whole. The sick, the broken, the ones written off by everyone, including themselves, found in him something they could not explain and could not walk away from. By the time the events of this final week began, his name was known across every corner of Judea and Galilee. Crowds did not simply gather to hear him. They pressed in. They climbed trees to see him. They lowered paralyzed men through rooftops because the doorways were too full. People camped outside towns he was heading towards. There was a shadow over all of it. The religious leadership in Jerusalem, the Pharisees, the chief priests, the scribes, the men who held both spiritual authority and considerable political power under Roman occupation, had been watching him with growing alarm. He taught with an authority that did not reference them. He pulled crowds they could not pull. He questioned their traditions publicly, called their motives what they were, and did not flinch when they pushed back. The breaking point came in Bethany, just 2 miles east of Jerusalem. Lazarus, a close friend of Jesus, had died. By the time Jesus arrived, Lazarus had been in the tomb 4 days. In the heat of Judea, there was no question about whether death was real and complete. Jesus stood at the sealed entrance to that tomb, with the dead man's sisters and a crowd of mourners watching, and called Lazarus out. Lazarus came out. That account spread through Jerusalem immediately. The response from the Sanhedrin, the ruling Jewish council, was not wonder. It was alarm. A council meeting was called. The decision reached that day was unanimous. Jesus had to be stopped. The high priest Caiaphas argued that one man's death was better than the destruction of the whole nation. It was cold political calculation dressed in theological language. The order was given. Jesus knew. He withdrew for a time to the wilderness near the town of Ephraim. When the time came, he turned toward Jerusalem and walked. The road from Bethany to Jerusalem runs down the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives, a descent of roughly 2 miles. On the morning Jesus made it, both sides of that road were lined with people. News had reached the city that the man who raised Lazarus was coming. Crowds poured out to meet him. Others lined the streets ahead. They cut palm branches and spread them on the road. They took off their outer garments and laid them down. As Jesus came over the crest of the hill, riding on a young donkey, they erupted. Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Every detail of this entry had been written down 500 years earlier by the prophet Zechariah. A king would come to Jerusalem riding on a donkey's colt, and he would bring peace. The crowd did not fully understand what they were enacting. They were shouting for a warrior king who would drive out Rome. They wanted revolution. What they were greeting was a sacrifice walking calmly toward an altar. When Jesus crested the hill and saw the full spread of Jerusalem below him, the ancient stones, the colonnades of the temple catching the morning sun, the packed streets, he stopped. He wept. not with joy, but with grief. He knew what was coming for this city. He knew the years ahead would bring destruction these people could not yet imagine. He continued down the hill. That evening he went to the temple, looked around at what was there, took note of the hour, and returned to Bethany for the night. Monday morning, Jesus walked the 2 miles back to Jerusalem. He entered the temple courts and found the outer court, the court of the Gentiles, the only section of the entire temple where non-Jewish people were permitted to pray, had been turned into a marketplace. Money changers ran booths converting Roman coins into the temple currency required for offerings. Merchants sold animals for sacrifice at rates controlled by the priestly families, who collected a portion of every transaction. The noise alone would have made prayer impossible. The commerce was deliberate. The profits flowed upward. Jesus began turning over tables. He drove out the animals, scattered the coins across the floor, and quoted 2 prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah, in a single breath. "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations. You have made it a hideout for criminals." The words, "all nations," carry considerable weight. This court existed specifically for Gentiles who wanted to approach God, and it had been taken over by a market. Jesus was not simply angry about dishonesty in a sacred space. He was furious that the one place designated for outsiders had been taken from them. The religious leaders who witnessed it moved carefully. The crowd was watching, and any open confrontation risked a riot that would bring Roman soldiers into the temple courts. So they watched and waited. Jesus taught in the temple courts every day that week. He healed the blind and the lame there, in full view of the chief priests and scribes, and their opposition deepened. That night, Jesus and his disciples left the city and slept in Bethany. Tuesday was the day the religious establishment came after him directly. They sent delegations. One group challenged his authority. "By what right do you do these things? And who gave it to you?" Jesus answered their question with a question of his own, and they could not respond without exposing themselves. So they fell silent. The Pharisees tried a political trap. They sent men with Herodians to ask about paying taxes to Caesar. Say yes, and you alienate the nationalists in the crowd who despise Roman taxation. Say no, and you hand the Romans grounds for arrest. Jesus asked to see a coin, held it up, and said, "Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God." The Sadducees, who did not believe in resurrection, came with a theological riddle about marriage and the afterlife. Jesus dismantled their premise entirely, told them they understood neither the scriptures nor the power of God, and left them with nothing to work with. A scribe asked which commandment was the greatest. "Love God with everything you are," Jesus told him, "and love your neighbor as yourself." The scribe agreed. Jesus told him he was not far from the kingdom of God. After a full day of debate in the temple courts, debate in which the religious leaders were consistently outmaneuvered in front of the crowd, Jesus turned and gave the scribes and Pharisees the most direct public condemnation of his entire ministry. He named their hypocrisy precisely, their love of public honor, their exploitation of widows, their religious performance, their pride. He called them whitewashed tombs, clean on the outside, full of death within. Then he sat down opposite the treasury and watched people deposit their offerings. The wealthy made large donations with ceremony. Then a widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, the smallest currency in circulation. Jesus told his disciples that this woman had given more than all the others combined. The others had given from their surplus. She had given everything she had. That evening they left the temple. As they walked out, one of the disciples gestured at the grandeur of the buildings. "Look at the size of this, the stones." Jesus said, "Not one of those stones would be left on top of another." They walked to the Mount of Olives and sat. The disciples asked when this would happen and what the signs would be. Jesus answered at length, speaking of wars and persecutions, false prophets, the destruction of Jerusalem, and an end that only the Father knew the timing of. He told them to stay awake, to be ready. No one knows the day or the hour. He told them 3 stories that evening, all about readiness. Then they walked back to Bethany. Somewhere in those same hours, while Jesus was speaking to his disciples on the Mount of Olives, one of those disciples was walking in a different direction. Judas Iscariot had been with Jesus from near the beginning. He had watched every miracle, heard every teaching, managed the group's money. He had been trusted. What drove him to it has been debated across 20 centuries. Greed, almost certainly, was part of it. Disillusionment, perhaps. A Passover week that kept building towards something other than the armed uprising many had expected. Whatever the reason, Judas went to the chief priests and asked them a direct question. "What will you give me to hand him over?" 30 pieces of silver, the precise price set in the law of Moses for a slave accidentally killed by a neighbor's ox. The temple leaders paid without hesitation. From that moment, Judas watched for his chance, an opportunity to hand Jesus over away from the crowd, away from witnesses who might intervene. Scripture is quiet about Wednesday. Jesus may have rested in Bethany. He may have spoken privately with his disciples. The accounts do not say. In Jerusalem, preparations for Passover were filling the city. Families were slaughtering and roasting the Passover lamb, the central act of the feast that commemorated the night God delivered Israel from Egypt. Unleavened bread was being prepared in every household. The city was packed with pilgrims from across the region. The lamb's blood would mark the doorpost. The death of the lamb would spare the household. This practice had been part of Jewish life for over 1,000 years. Nobody in Jerusalem that Wednesday evening understood that the fulfillment of the entire ceremony was 48 hours away. Thursday evening, Jesus sent 2 disciples ahead into Jerusalem with specific instructions. Find a man carrying a water jar, follow him to a house, and tell the owner that the teacher asks, "Where is the room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?" They followed those instructions exactly. The room was ready, furnished, upstairs. When the full group arrived, Jesus sat down with his 12 disciples for what would be the last meal they shared before his death. The tension at that table was already present before a word was spoken. The disciples had been arguing earlier that day about which of them was the greatest, which would hold the highest position in the kingdom they expected Jesus to establish. There was pride and competition beneath the surface of the group. Jesus said nothing about it yet. He stood up from the table, took off his outer garment, tied a towel around his waist, filled a basin with water, and began washing his disciples' feet one by one. In 1st century Judea, foot washing was the work of the lowest household servant, the non-Jewish slave who ranked at the bottom of the household structure. A Jewish slave was not expected to wash feet. A rabbi's own disciples were not expected to wash his. Jesus, their teacher, the man who had stilled storms and raised the dead, knelt in front of them with a basin and a cloth. Peter refused. "Not you, Lord, not my feet." "You do not understand what I am doing now," Jesus told him, "but you will." He moved through all 12, including Judas. When he sat back down, he told them, "If I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, then you should wash one another's feet. The greatest among you should behave as the youngest, and the leader as the one who serves." The argument they had been having that afternoon now sat in the room with nowhere to hide. Then he said that one of them would betray him. They looked at one another in confusion. Each began asking, "Is it me?" They genuinely did not know. Judas asked it too. Jesus dipped a piece of bread and handed it to him, a gesture of honor, giving the dipped piece to a guest. "What you are going to do it quickly." Judas took the bread and walked out into the night. The others assumed he had gone to buy something or to give something to the poor. Jesus took the bread that remained on the table, gave thanks, broke it, and said, "This is my body, given for you. Do this in memory of me." He lifted the cup of wine. "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." They drank, not knowing they were sharing something that would still be observed 2,000 years later at tables across every continent on earth. After the meal, Jesus spoke to them at length. Some of his most carefully remembered words come from this room on this night. Do not let your hearts be troubled. In my Father's house there are many rooms. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. He prayed over them, a prayer asking the Father to protect them, to keep them unified, to make them holy, to one day bring them to see his glory. Then they sang a hymn and walked out into the darkness toward the Mount of Olives. Gethsemane sits on the western slope of the Mount of Olives, just across the Kidron Valley from Jerusalem's eastern wall. The name means oil press. It was an enclosed garden of olive trees. Jesus had been there many times before. Judas knew exactly where to find him. Jesus told most of the disciples to sit and wait near the entrance. He took Peter, James, and John and went further in. Then he told even them to stay and keep watch, and moved forward alone. The gospel accounts use words that translate as deeply distressed, overwhelmed with grief, in anguish. He fell face down on the ground. Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. He was not asking to avoid death out of fear. He was standing at the exact point where the weight of what he was about to carry became real and immediate. The full accumulation of human wrongdoing, every act, every betrayal, every cruelty, everything that separates people from God, was about to be placed on him. He knew what that meant. He was asking if there was another way. And then, in the same breath, not my will, but yours. He came back and found Peter, James, and John asleep. Could you not keep watch for even 1 hour? He asked them to pray, went back, the same prayer again, came back, asleep again, 3 times. The Gospel of Luke records that his sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. Doctors have documented this phenomenon, hematidrosis, where extreme psychological stress causes the capillaries supplying the sweat glands to rupture, so blood seeps into the sweat. It is rare, but it is real. His body was already under severe strain before anyone laid a hand on him. Then torchlight appeared at the garden's edge. A crowd came through the trees, temple guards, soldiers, members of the chief priest's delegation. At the front of them, Judas. The signal they had agreed on was a greeting kiss, the traditional sign of respect from a disciple to a teacher. Judas walked straight to Jesus and embraced him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you came to do." The guards moved in. Peter drew a sword and swung it, cutting off the ear of the high priest's servant, a man named Malchus. Jesus reached over, touched the man's ear, and healed it. He told Peter to put the sword away. He said that if he wanted protection, he had access to resources that would make a handful of temple guards irrelevant. He did not want protection. The disciples, seeing him submit to arrest, ran. Every one of them. The men who hours earlier had said they would die rather than abandon him scattered into the darkness. Jesus was led away toward the city alone. What followed through the rest of that night and into the next morning were 6 separate trials. 3 before Jewish authorities, 3 before Roman, conducted in hours during which Jewish law should have prohibited all of them. The law prohibited night trials. It prohibited capital cases during festival periods. It prohibited same-day execution of a verdict. Every one of these protections was set aside. He was taken first to Annas, a former high priest with enormous ongoing influence, who questioned him about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answered calmly. He had spoken publicly, in the synagogues and in the temple, in front of everyone. Why question him privately? A guard standing there struck him across the face. "Is that how you answer the high priest?" Jesus did not retaliate. He pointed out the contradiction. If he had said something wrong, name what it was. If not, what was the reason for the blow? Outside in the courtyard, Peter had followed at a distance. He stood by a fire with a group of servants and guards. A servant girl looked at him. "You were with him, the Galilean." Peter denied it. He was recognized again. he denied it again. The third time, those standing nearby pressed him. They could hear his Galilean accent. He denied knowing Jesus with an oath, calling down curses on himself to prove the point. At that moment, a rooster crowed. Across the courtyard, Jesus was being led somewhere else. He turned and looked directly at Peter. Peter remembered. "Before the rooster crows tonight, you will deny me 3 times." Peter walked out of the courtyard and wept. Jesus was taken before Caiaphas and the full Sanhedrin. Witnesses were brought, but their accounts contradicted one another. Caiaphas stood up and put the question directly. "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Jesus said, "I am." And he added that they would see him seated at the right hand of the Almighty, coming on the clouds of heaven. He was referencing Daniel chapter 7, the vision of the Son of Man receiving all authority from the Ancient of Days. He was not simply confirming Caiaphas' question. He was placing himself inside the most exalted prophecy in the Hebrew Scriptures. Caiaphas tore his robe, the gesture of a judge confronted with blasphemy, and asked for a verdict. Guilty, worthy of death. The mockery began immediately. They spat on him. They blindfolded him and struck him. They taunted him to name who had hit him. As dawn broke, the sentence was formalized. The Sanhedrin could not carry out an execution. Under Roman rule, the authority to put someone to death belonged exclusively to Rome. They needed Pontius Pilate. Pilate was the Roman prefect of Judea, a practical administrator who had been in the posting long enough to understand the dynamics of Jewish religious politics and to find them exhausting. He did not want to be managing a religious dispute on Passover morning. The Sanhedrin brought Jesus to the governor's residence, but would not go inside themselves. Entering a Gentile building during Passover would make them ritually unclean. Pilate came out to them. "What charges do you bring?" They were vague. "He is a criminal." Pilate told them to judge him by their own law. They told him they could not execute anyone. He had to deal with it. Pilate went back inside and brought Jesus in with him. He questioned him privately. "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus asked whether the question was Pilate's own or had come from others. They spoke. Pilate asked what he had done. Jesus said his kingdom was not the kind Rome needed to worry about. It was not of this world, and if it were, there would have been a fight at his arrest. Pilate went back out. "I find no basis for a charge against this man." The Sanhedrin pushed harder. "He has been stirring up the people across all of Judea, from Galilee all the way here." Galilee. Pilate picked up the word. That put Jesus under the jurisdiction of Herod Antipas, the tetrarch of Galilee, who was in Jerusalem for the Passover. Pilate sent Jesus to Herod. Herod had wanted to meet Jesus for some time. He had heard about the miracles and wanted a demonstration on demand. He questioned Jesus at length. Jesus said nothing, not a word. Herod and his soldiers mocked him, dressed him in a lavish robe in parody of his supposed kingship, and sent him back to Pilate. Pilate tried once more to release him. He called the chief priests and the rulers together and told them plainly that neither he nor Herod had found any basis for the death penalty. He proposed to have Jesus flogged and released. Then he offered them a choice. There was a custom at Passover where the governor would release one prisoner of the crowd's choosing. Barabbas was in custody for insurrection and murder. Pilate put the choice to them. Jesus Barabbas, or Jesus called the Messiah. While he was still on the judgment seat, a message came from his wife. She had suffered through a disturbing dream that night. "Have nothing to do with that man. He is innocent." Pilate looked at the crowd. The chief priests and elders had been working through it since dawn, pressing the case. The crowd shouted for Barabbas and for Jesus, crucifixion. Pilate asked what crime he had committed. The shouting only grew louder. He took water, washed his hands in front of the crowd, and declared that the blood of this man was not on his hands. The crowd took the words directly. "His blood is on us," they shouted, "and on our children." Pilate released Barabbas and handed Jesus over to the soldiers. The whip used in Roman flogging was called the flagellum. leather straps with pieces of bone and metal embedded at the ends. The goal was to strip the flesh. Prisoners sometimes died during the flogging itself. There was no set minimum number of blows, and the maximum was not strictly enforced. Afterward, in the praetorium's courtyard, the soldiers continued. They wove a crown from thorny branches and jammed it down onto his head. They threw a scarlet cloak over his shoulders in parody of royal dress, knelt in front of him, and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews!" They struck him with a staff they had placed in his hand as a scepter. They spat on him. When they had finished, they took the cloak off and put his own clothes back on him and led him out. The path from Pilate's residence to the place of execution was less than a kilometer through the narrow streets of Jerusalem's old city. That path is still there. Pilgrims walk it today. It is called the Via Dolorosa. Jesus carried the horizontal beam of the cross, as was the custom. The weight, combined with blood loss and shock from the flogging, brought him down. The soldiers pulled a man named Simon from Cyrene out of the crowd and put the beam on him instead. Women were weeping along the sides of the road. Jesus stopped and spoke to them. "Do not weep for me," he said. "Weep for yourselves and for your children." The road ended at a rocky outcrop outside the city walls called Golgotha, the skull. At the 3rd hour of the day, 9 in the morning, they nailed him to the cross. The nails went through the wrists, at the point that provided the structural support required. His feet were fixed to the upright. The cross was raised and dropped into place. On either side, 2 other men were crucified at the same time. One joined the soldiers and the passing crowd in mocking him. The other rebuked the first. "We deserve what we are getting. This man has done nothing wrong." Then he turned to Jesus. "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." Today, Jesus told him, "You will be with me in paradise." Pilate had a notice fixed to the top of the cross. "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews," written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests objected. "Write that he claimed to be King of the Jews." Pilate refused. "What I have written, I have written." The soldiers divided his garments among themselves, casting lots for his seamless tunic, fulfilling a psalm written 1,000 years earlier by David. They sat down and kept watch. Those who passed by hurled insults. "If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." The chief priests, the scribes, and the elders joined in. "He saved others. He cannot save himself. Let God rescue him now if God wants him." They were precisely right about one thing. He was not coming down. The rescue was happening, but not in the direction they expected. At the foot of the cross, a small group had not moved: his mother's sister, Mary Magdalene, and the disciple John. Jesus looked down at his mother and at John and gave them to one another. "Woman, here is your son." To John, "Here is your mother." From that hour, John took her into his own home. At noon, the sun disappeared. Darkness across the land from the 6th hour to the 9th. 3 hours. Those standing there had no explanation for it. At 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a voice loud enough to carry across the noise of the crowd, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The opening line of Psalm 22, a psalm that had described crucifixion in precise detail before crucifixion existed as a Roman practice. He was marking the moment. He was standing inside the text. He said he was thirsty. Someone soaked a sponge in cheap wine and lifted it to him on a stick. Then, in a voice that carried all the deliberateness of a completed task, he said, "It is finished." He bowed his head and gave up his life. The earth shook. The rocks split. The curtain of the temple, the thick woven barrier that separated the outer courts from the innermost chamber, the Holy of Holies, where the presence of God was said to dwell, tore from top to bottom. Not from the bottom up, as a person tearing it would cause, but from the top. The centurion standing watch directly in front of him had seen many executions and knew what the last hours of a man's life looked like. What he watched here was different. He looked at the earthquake, the darkness, the manner of Jesus' death, and said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." The Sabbath began at sundown on Friday. No work was permitted, including burial. The bodies had to be dealt with before the day ended. Joseph of Arimathea went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. He was a member of the Sanhedrin who had not consented to what had been done, a man of wealth, and privately a follower of Jesus. Pilate verified that Jesus was dead. The soldiers confirmed it, noting the spear one of them had driven into his side. Blood and water had poured from the wound, a detail so specific and unusual that John recorded it and insisted on its truth. Joseph was given the body. He and Nicodemus, another council member who had once come to Jesus by night, asking questions he could not ask in public, wrapped the body in linen strips with spices between the layers, 75 pounds of myrrh and aloe. They placed him in a new tomb cut from rock in a garden near the Crucifixion site. A large stone was rolled across the entrance. The chief priests went to Pilate again on Saturday. They remembered that Jesus had said something about rising after 3 days. They wanted a guard posted. If his disciples stole the body and claimed he had risen, the situation would become unmanageable. Pilate gave them a guard unit and told them to secure it as they saw fit. They sealed the stone. They posted the soldiers. Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark. The stone had been moved. She ran and found Peter and the disciple Jesus loved and told them someone had taken the body. They ran to the tomb. The other disciple arrived first, bent down, looked in, and saw the linen wrappings lying there. Peter went straight in. The burial cloths were there, flat, in place, but the body was not inside them. The cloth that had wrapped the head was folded separately, set apart. They left. Mary stayed outside the tomb, weeping. She bent down and looked in. 2 figures in white were sitting where the body had been, one at the head, one at the feet. "Woman, why are you weeping?" she said. "They have taken my Lord, and I don't know where they have laid him." She turned around. A man was standing there. She did not recognize him and assumed he was the gardener. "Woman, why are you weeping? Who are you looking for?" She asked him to tell her where the body had been taken. He said her name, Mary, in that single word, recognition. She turned fully. She said, in Aramaic, "Rabboni, teacher." He told her not to hold on to him, but to go and tell the disciples what she had seen. "I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." She ran. The first person sent to announce the resurrection of Jesus was a woman whose testimony had no legal standing in a Jewish court. Every choice of this week had been deliberate. He appeared to the disciples that evening. They were locked in a room, afraid. He appeared among them, without the door being opened, stood in the middle of the group, and said, "Peace be with you." They were terrified, believing they were seeing something that was not real. He showed them his hands and his side. When they saw the wounds, the terror broke. He breathed on them. He gave them a commission. He told them they were being sent out as he had been sent. Thomas was not there that evening. When the others told him what had happened, he refused to believe it. He would not accept second-hand testimony. He needed to touch the wounds himself. 8 days later, Jesus appeared again. Thomas was there. Jesus went directly to him. "Put your finger here," he said. "Look at my hands. Reach out and place your hand in my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas did not need to touch him. He fell to his knees. "My Lord and my God." Jesus said, "You believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who have not seen and still believe." Back in Galilee, 7 of the disciples had gone out on the lake and fished through the night without catching anything. As dawn came, a man on the shore told them to cast the net on the right side. They did. The net filled so completely, they could not drag it in. John looked at the catch and said to Peter, "It is the Lord." Peter jumped into the water. Jesus had a charcoal fire going on the beach, bread and fish already cooking. He told them to bring some of what they had caught. They sat down and ate with him. He spoke to Peter there 3 times, asking whether he loved him. 3 questions to answer the 3 denials. 3 times commissioning him. Feed my lambs. Take care of my sheep. Follow me. He met with more than 500 people at one time on a mountain in Galilee. The accounts are specific about this number. Most of these people were still alive when the accounts were written and could be asked directly. 40 days after the resurrection, on the Mount of Olives, Jesus lifted his hands, blessed the disciples, and as they watched, he ascended. A cloud covered him, and he was gone from their sight. 2 men in white appeared beside the disciples. Why are you standing here looking at the sky? This same Jesus will come back in the same way you have seen him go. They returned to Jerusalem and waited. 50 days after Passover came the Jewish feast of Pentecost. The disciples were gathered in one place. Something came over them that they described as wind and fire. They began speaking in languages they had not learned, and the crowd outside the building heard them speaking in their own native tongues. People from every region around the Mediterranean. Peter stood up and addressed the crowd in Jerusalem, the same city where Jesus had been crucified 7 weeks earlier, and told them plainly that God had raised Jesus from the dead, and that every person standing there could know this for themselves. 3,000 people responded that day. Within a few years, this movement had spread to Rome, to North Africa, to Persia, to India. Within 3 centuries, it had reached every province of the empire that had executed its founder. The emperor, who had been the ultimate authority behind the death sentence, would eventually be replaced in Rome by a cross. The disciples who had run from Gethsemane in the dark, the ones who had sworn loyalty and scattered the moment the arrest came, went on to spend the rest of their lives telling this story. Most of them were killed for it. Peter was crucified upside down, having asked not to die in the same position as his Lord. James was executed by sword. They did not waver. They did not recant. Men will die for a cause they believe in. Men rarely die for something they know to be false. 2,000 years have passed. Empires that seem permanent have collapsed. Languages have changed. Technologies have remade how human beings live so completely that a person from the 1st century would not recognize the world. And yet, on every continent, in thousands of languages, in cathedrals and in living rooms, and in places where gathering carries real risk, people still read these accounts, still remember this week, still share bread and wine in memory of the Thursday night when Jesus broke it. The cross, Rome's symbol of shame and punishment, became the most recognized symbol in human history. What happened in that one week? The entry into Jerusalem, the meal in the upper room, the garden, the trials, the flogging, the crucifixion, and then the empty tomb, was not simply a religious event in the history of one ancient culture. It was, if the accounts are true, the moment the permanent separation between the human and the divine was bridged from the divine side, not by human effort or moral performance, but by the willing death of the one person who had no debt of his own to pay. He bore what he did not owe so that what we cannot pay might be cancelled. It is finished were the exact words of a completed transaction. The word the ancient Greek world used to write across a bill of debt when it had been fully settled. Paid in full. That is the message of the week. That is what the cross carries. That is what the empty tomb confirmed. If any part of what you've heard today stirred something in you, don't let it pass without sitting with it for a moment. Leave a comment. Tell us where you are in this. Every word left in that section reaches people who are searching in the middle of the night for exactly the kind of honesty you might be able to offer. And if this story matters to you, share it. The accounts of this week survived 2,000 years because ordinary people with no influence kept telling it to the person next to them. That is still how it travels. God bless you.